Welcome to the Strategy Sync YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries. So, I want you to imagine this for a second.
Okay.
You are scrolling through your social media feed.
Like we all do every day.
Right, exactly. And you just happen to pause on this beautifully photographed ad for a local coffee shop.
Oh, yeah. I know the kind.
Yeah, the lighting is super warm and inviting. There's steam rising gently off a perfectly poured latte, and the cup looks incredibly elegant.
Objectively, a stunning piece of marketing.
Right. But as you look at it, this very subtle, almost imperceptible wave of unease just sort of washes over you.
You don't consciously know why.
Exactly. Your brain just rejects the image. You scroll past and you feel this tiny fleeting spike of annoyance.
Which is fascinating because what you didn't consciously realize.
Yes. What your nervous system absolutely flagged was that the handle of that coffee cup was facing to the left.
Or maybe the model was holding it with their left hand.
Right. And because you, roughly 90% of the human population are right-handed, that tiny visual detail didn't match your physical lived experience.
Your brain essentially ran a micro-simulation of grabbing that cup.
And it found it clumsy and backwards, so it punished you with a negative physical feeling.
It is a phenomenal example of how much is happening just beneath the surface of our awareness.
It really is.
Because, we like to tell ourselves this very comforting narrative about human behavior.
Oh, absolutely.
We all think we're so logical.
Right. We want to believe that we are the conscious, deliberate captains of our own ships.
Just logically weighing the pros and cons of every single choice we make.
But when we actually look at the biological reality of the brain, we find that the ship is entirely steering itself.
And the captain is just standing on the deck, confidently taking credit for a route they didn't chart.
That's exactly it.
Which brings us to the core mission of our deep dive today.
We have a really fascinating book to get into. We do. We are unpacking an incredibly insightful book called Neuromarketing: Practical Insights for Improving Customer Engagement by Katie Hart.
It's such a necessary read.
It is, because we are going to explore why traditional methods of persuasion, whether that's a massive corporate ad campaign, a sales pitch, or even just trying to convince a friend to go to a specific restaurant, so often fall completely flat.
Because they're talking to the wrong part of the brain.
Exactly. We are looking past the surface level psychology and digging into the actual neuroscience of what captures human attention.
How memories are physically encoded.
Yes, and what truly drives the estimated 35,000 decisions you make every single day.
35,000 is just a staggering volume of choices when you really think about it.
It's hard to even wrap your head around.
It is.
Right.
And the central thesis of Hart's book is that if you want to understand how people navigate those choices, you have to stop listening to what people say they want.
And start looking directly at the hardware of the human mind.
Right, because the biological mechanisms driving us haven't changed significantly in thousands of years.
But we still market to people like they are these purely logical processing machines.
Which they absolutely are not.
So let's start right there. Let's dismantle that core assumption of human rationality, because early on in the book, there is this statistic that just reframes everything.
It's a big one.
Yeah. I mean, even if you aren't a professional marketer, this is essentially the user manual for your own head. The book states that 95% of what goes into our decision-making happens entirely below our conscious threshold.
That's right. 95%.
That is wild.
It means the vast majority of our cognitive processing is completely inaccessible to our conscious awareness.
Leaving just a tiny 5%.
A mere 5% of our decision-making process that we can actually articulate.
Which fundamentally undermines the way most businesses operate, right?
Completely. I mean, think about the standard focus group.
Oh yeah, the classic marketing tool.
Right. A company brings 10 people into a room and asks them, hey, why did you choose this product over the competitors?
And they always give these really articulate, logical answers.
Exactly. They'll cite the price point or the feature list or the color.
But Hart points out that they aren't lying, right?
No. They genuinely believe the reasons they're providing.
But they are fundamentally incapable of reporting on the 95% of subconscious drivers that actually made the choice for them.
Precisely. They literally cannot tell you because they don't know.
So essentially, when companies throw millions at focus groups and surveys, they're interviewing the public relations spokesperson.
Not the actual decision maker.
Right. The person answering is just rationalizing a biological impulse they don't even know happened.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it.
It kind of makes you question everything you do.
Well, if you build your entire communication strategy based on that visible 5% plate, you are operating entirely in the dark. To understand why this happens, we have to look at the sheer physics of what the brain is doing at any given moment.
The actual biology of it.
Right. The human nervous system is bombarded with roughly 11 million pieces of information every single second.
Wait, 11 million?
11 million bits of sensory data.
That number is hard to even process. So that's like every hair on your arm feeling the temperature of the room.
Yes. The hum of the refrigerator in the background.
The pressure of your shoes on your feet.
The exact angle of the light coming through the window. It is the cumulative total of all visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory, and gustatory inputs.
Okay, so 11 million coming in.
Now contrast that 11 million with the capacity of your conscious mind.
The 5%.
Right. The conscious part of your brain can process at best about 40 to 50 bits of information per second.
40 to 50. Out of 11 million.
The disparity is astronomical.
It's like trying to drink from a fire hose with a tiny straw.
Exactly. The brain has to manage this massive influx of data just to keep you alive, keep you upright, and keep your organs functioning.
And doing that takes a lot of energy, right?
Phenomenal amount of biological energy.
I think the book said the brain is only about 2% of our total body weight.
Right. But it consumes a massive 20% of your body's daily energy resources.
20%.
It is by far the most biologically expensive organ you possess.
Let's ground this in a real-world equivalent for you listening. Think of your brain like a smartphone.
Oh, I love this analogy.
Yeah, so you have the subconscious, which acts like all the background processes running constantly to keep the phone functional.
It's maintaining the cell connection, pinging Wi-Fi routers,
regulating the battery temperature and running the core operating system. You never see any of this happening, but it's processing millions of bits of data just to keep the device alive.
And then you open a high-end, extremely graphics-heavy video game.
Right. That active app is your conscious thought.
It's brilliant and capable of complex tasks.
But it requires immense localized power, and if you leave it running, it will drain your battery to 0 in an hour.
It's an apt comparison because the brain truly operates on a strict energy economy.
It's always trying to save battery.
Always. Hart actually uses a very specific exercise in the book to demonstrate how quickly that conscious battery drains.
Let's do it right now.
Okay, if you are listening to this right now, I want you to try calculating 35 multiplied by 17 in your head.
Oh boy.
Do not reach for a calculator. Do not write it down. Just hold the numbers in your mind and attempt the math.
Okay, so 35 times 10 is 350.
Keep going.
Then 35 times 7, I actually have to close my eyes to block out visual data just to hold those numbers in place.
Notice what physically happens when you try to do that.
It's a struggle.
Your pupils likely dilated slightly. Your heart rate might have bumped up a fraction of a beat.
Yeah, I feel tense.
And most importantly, while you are wrestling with that math, you are completely incapable of simultaneously wondering what you'll have for dinner tonight.
Or planning my route to work tomorrow.
Exactly. Your conscious capacity is entirely maxed out.
The answer is 595, by the way.
Good job.
But you're right, it feels like a physical strain. It literally feels like lifting a heavy weight inside your skull.
Well, that heavy lifting is being performed by your neocortex.
The newest part of the brain.
Yes, in evolutionary terms, this is the newest hardware we have. It's the outer layer, that deeply folded surface we usually picture when we think of a brain.
And it handles all the complex stuff.
High-level logic, complex language, spatial reasoning, future planning.
And math equations like 35 times 17.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But precisely because it is so sophisticated, it is incredibly slow to operate.
And it eats up the battery?
It requires a massive amount of metabolic energy. It is so expensive to run that the brain actively tries to power it down whenever possible to conserve resources.
Okay, so if the neocortex is the slow, expensive supercomputer that we try to keep turned off, what is running the background operating system?
Handling the rest.
Yeah, what is managing the other 95% of our daily lives?
That brings us to the older, more deeply embedded structures of the brain, often referred to as the limbic system, or more colloquially, the reptilian brain.
Your reptilian brain.
This system is ancient. It does not do complex math, and it does not understand language in a logical sense.
Well, what does it do?
It is fast. It is instinctual, and its singular overriding priority is your immediate survival.
Survival above all else.
And unlike the neocortex, the reptilian brain is permanently on.
Okay, so if I'm fast asleep in my bed at 3 in the morning, my neocortex is essentially offline.
Right. You're not doing math.
I'm not capable of planning my day. But if there's a sudden loud sound of glass breaking down stairs, I don't logically process the sound waves.
You don't.
I am instantly awake. My heart is pounding and my muscles are tense before I even have a conscious thought about what just happened.
Precisely. That is your reptilian brain at work.
It just bypasses everything.
It processed the auditory anomaly, cross-referenced it with survival threats, flooded your bloodstream with adrenaline, and prepared your body for a fight or flight response,
All in a fraction of a second.
completely bypassing your logical neocortex.
Wow. When we tie this back to the core concept of the book Improving Customer Engagement, the implication seems pretty stark.
It really is.
If we spend all our time writing marketing copy that lists 10 logical reasons why our software is better, or explaining the complex nuances of our pricing tier,
We are effectively handing our audience a 35 times 17 math problem.
yes, we are forcing them to boot up their neocortex.
And because the brain is fundamentally lazy in its pursuit of energy conservation, it will resist doing that math.
It just wants to save battery.
Communicating purely to the neocortex is the single biggest mistake in traditional marketing.
So what's the alternative?
If you want to actually get noticed to create a sense of desire or to drive an action, you must bypass the supercomputer.
And talk to the lizard.
Yeah. Speak directly to the fast, ancient, energy-efficient reptilian system first. You have to make the decision feel instinctually safe and rewarding before logic ever enters the equation.
That makes perfect theoretical sense. But it raises a huge methodological problem for me.
Yeah.
If 95% of our decision-making is happening in this hidden, fast-acting, nonverbal part of the brain, how do we actually measure it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right, because we already established that we can't just hand out surveys. We need a way to look beneath the hood.
And this is exactly where the field of neuromarketing moves from theory into hard science.
We don't have to guess anymore.
We no longer have to rely on asking people what they think we can directly observe what their biology is doing.
The book details a whole suite of specific clinical tools, right?
Yes, tools that marketers and researchers now use to basically peek inside the skull. The most famous is likely the fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance imaging.
I think most people have seen an fMRI in medical dramas. It's the giant magnetic tube you slide into.
Right.
But how does that actually tell us anything about whether someone likes a new advertisement?
It all comes down to blood flow.
Blood flow.
Yes. When a specific region of the brain becomes active, say the area associated with visual pleasure or emotional resonance, the neurons in that area require more oxygen to function.
So the body sends more blood.
Exactly. The body responds by rushing oxygen-rich blood to that specific region.
And the machine can see that.
The fMRI uses powerful magnetic fields to detect the iron in that blood. So by monitoring the blood flow in real time while a subject watches a commercial, researchers can see exactly which emotional centers are lighting up,
And which ones are staying completely dormant.
regardless of what the subject later claims they felt.
That is incredible. But I imagine putting a consumer in a multi-million-dollar medical tube isn't exactly a scalable business practice for most marketing agencies.
No, it really isn't. It's prohibitively expensive, which is why neuromarketers heavily rely on more accessible, non-invasive tools.
Like what?
They use EEG or electroencephalography.
The cap with all the wires?
Yes, it involves placing a cap of sensors on the scalp to measure the actual electrical firing of synapses in the brain. They also use PET scans sometimes, though, that requires a radioactive chemical injection, so it's less common for basic marketing.
Right. What else?
They use highly sophisticated biometrics. This includes tracking microscopic eye movements to see exactly what draws the gaze first,
Heat mapping, basically.
monitoring heart rate variability, and utilizing galvanic skin response.
Galvanic skin response. That's essentially tracking how much your body is sweating, right?
Yes, it measures the minute fluctuations in sweat gland activity on the skin.
Even if it's so microscopic you can't feel it yourself.
Exactly. Our sweat glands are controlled by the sympathetic nervous system, which is tied directly to that emotional reptilian brain we discussed.
It's an unconscious reaction.
When you experience a subconscious spike of stress, fear, or excitement, your skin conductance changes instantly.
And Hart uses this absolutely phenomenal experiment in the book to demonstrate just how powerful this specific measurement is.
The Iowa gambling task.
Yes. Let's dive deep into this card experiment, because this was the moment in the book where the true power of the subconscious really clicked into place for me.
It perfectly illustrates the profound gap between our subconscious biological reality and our conscious awareness.
The setup is deceptively simple, right?
Very simple. Researchers sat participants down at a table with 4 decks of cards in front of them.
And they gave them a starting bankroll of play money.
Right, and told them that their only goal was to draw cards from the decks to maximize their winnings.
But there's a catch.
A big catch. What they didn't know was that the decks were rigged.
Of course they were.
2 of the decks were good decks. They provided steady, moderate payouts with only small occasional penalties. If you stuck to these, you would slowly get rich.
And the other 2?
The other 2 were bad decks. They offered massive, exciting payouts, But hidden inside them were catastrophic, unpredictable penalties that would eventually bankrupt the player.
Okay, so the participants are just sitting there happily flipping over cards, trying to logically deduce the pattern of the game. But all the while, they are hooked up to these biometric sensors, specifically measuring their galvanic skin response, their microscopic stress sweat.
Correct. Now, conscious logic dictates that you have to play the game for quite a while to gather enough data to figure out the hidden pattern.
You have to build a sample size.
And consciously, the participants did need a lot of time. When the researchers stopped the game periodically and asked the players what was going on, the players couldn't consciously articulate which decks were dangerous and which were safe until they had drawn roughly 40 to 50 cards.
50 cards?
It took 50 draws for their logical neocortex to crunch the numbers, spot the trend, and say, aha, I need to avoid those two decks.
But the data from the skin sensors told a completely different story.
A radically different story.
Yeah.
The biometric data showed that the participants' bodies figured out the game almost immediately.
How fast?
After drawing an average of just 11 cards.
11 cards.
11 there. The sensors recorded clear, sharp spikes in stress, literal nervous sweating, every single time a participant's hand reached toward one of the bad decks.
By card 11, their body knew.
The subconscious reptilian brain had recognized the mathematical danger, flagged the threat, and was physically screaming at the body to stop.
Yet the conscious neocortex remained completely oblivious.
Blissfully pulling cards for another 30 or 40 rounds.
Just think about the implications of that for a second. For 30 entire decisions, your physical biology knows exactly what the threat is. It's sending distress signals, and your conscious mind is just happily humming along, completely ignorant.
It proves that there is a massive chasm, a literal timeline gap between physiological knowing and conscious knowing.
That chasm is the defining territory of neuromarketing, isn't it?
It is. It proves unequivocally that our subconscious is processing vast arrays of data, calculating complex risk-to-reward ratios, and generating physical emotional responses far faster than our conscious mind can ever hope to keep up.
Which means if you are a business owner waiting for your customer to consciously articulate why they find your website confusing,
or why your product packaging feels untrustworthy,
you are waiting for card 50.
Exactly. You're waiting for card 50. But their biometric response, their ancient reptilian brain already assessed the threat, rejected your brand, and moved on to a competitor at card 11.
That is chilling if you're in sales.
It really is.
Okay, so if this fast-acting reptilian brain is pulling the levers, what are the actual levers made of?
Chemistry.
Right? That's not magic, it's chemistry. The book details the specific neurotransmitters and hormones that act as the chemical messengers driving these decisions.
And they are incredibly powerful.
And I want to start with dopamine because the way Hart explains it completely upended how I thought about motivation.
Most people misunderstand dopamine.
I always categorize dopamine as the reward chemical. Like I complete a difficult task or I eat an incredibly rich piece of chocolate cake and my brain gives me a hit of dopamine as a reward.
That is the most common misconception. We think of it as the celebration molecule.
But it's not.
No. Deep neurological studies show that dopamine levels actually spike the highest during the anticipation of a reward, not when the reward is finally acquired.
Wait, really? So the thrill of tracking a package online and knowing it's going to be delivered today produces a higher chemical high than actually opening the cardboard box?
Precisely.
That's wild.
To understand why we have to look at our evolutionary history, dopamine is fundamentally a motivation chemical.
It's the engine.
If you are an ancient hunter-gatherer, dopamine is what gives you the relentless drive to track an animal for 3 days across the savannah.
Yeah.
It is the fuel of the pursuit.
And once you catch it.
Once you actually secure the food, the pursuit is over, the motivation is no longer needed, and the dopamine levels plummet.
Oh, wow.
This is why in the modern digital age, you can spend 2 hours scrolling through an online store, adding items to your cart, feeling highly stimulated and engaged.
But the moment the items actually arrive on your doorstep a week later, the thrill completely evaporates.
That perfectly explains the phenomenon of buyer's remorse.
The chemical high is gone, and you're just left looking at a sweater you don't actually need.
Exactly.
So a marketer who understands neuroscience isn't optimizing for the moment of purchase.
No, they are heavily optimizing for the buildup.
The countdown timers, the teaser trailers, the elaborate unboxing experiences.
They are engineering anticipation spikes. They are stretching the dopamine release.
Okay, so that's dopamine. Now contrast that with cortisol, which is our primary stress hormone.
Cortisol is vital for our survival because it triggers the fight or flight response.
The panic button.
When a threat appears, cortisol floods. The system increases your heart rate and literally diverts blood flow away from non-essential systems like digestion.
And pushes it toward your limbs so you can run or fight.
Right. But the critical point the book makes is what cortisol does to the brain during that process.
What does it do?
When cortisol levels are high, the brain actively degrades our higher executive functions.
It turns off the neocortex.
Yes, because the neocortex is so slow and resource heavy, the survival mechanism essentially unplugs it.
I guess in a life or death situation, you don't want to be slowly, logically debating the pros and cons of running away from a predator.
You just want to run. Therefore, when we are stressed, our neocortex gets physically impaired. We lose the ability to weigh complex options. We default to deeply ingrained habits, and we actively avoid making new decisions.
This is where it gets highly practical for business.
Very practical.
If you are a consumer trying to buy something from a website and the navigation menu is cluttered, or a pop-up ad suddenly blocks the screen,
Or the checkout page takes too long to load a pay.
you aren't just annoying them, you are triggering a microspike of cortisol.
You are literally making them less capable of logical thought in that exact moment.
Shutting down the very part of the brain you need them to use to read your persuasive copy.
You are inducing a state of cognitive impairment.
That's terrifying.
This is why frictionless design isn't just an aesthetic choice, it's a biological imperative.
Wow. Okay, then, moving past motivation and stress, we
Right.
have the social chemicals.
Yes, serotonin and oxytocin.
Serotonin plays a massive role in regulating our mood, our impulse control, and our social dominance, right?
Exactly. When we feel respected, valued, and high status within our tribe, our serotonin levels are healthy.
And finally, we have oxytocin, frequently called the bonding hormone.
People usually associate it with physical touch.
Like hugging someone you care about?
Yes, but it goes way beyond the physical. Oxytocin is the chemical foundation of trust, empathy, and social connection.
How does that apply to marketing?
When a brand tells a deeply moving narrative that resonates with our own struggles, or when a customer service representative goes out of their way to make us feel genuinely seen and understood as a human being, they are triggering an oxytocin release.
It builds a chemical bond.
This chemical bond is what fosters profound, irrational brand loyalty.
It's why people will happily pay more for a product from a company they feel connected to rather than buying a cheaper, identical alternative.
Exactly.
Okay, I need to pause here and look at this from a slightly different angle because I'm sure you at home are wondering about this too.
Sure, what is it?
We're talking about mapping brainwaves to find hidden biological triggers. We are discussing how to intentionally engineer environments that spike dopamine for motivation and drop oxytocin for trust, entirely bypassing the conscious logical mind of the consumer.
Right.
Does this cross a line? It sounds perilously close to weaponized persuasion or outright manipulation.
It's a completely valid concern, and it's a tension Katie Hart addresses directly in the book when discussing the ethical applications of neuromarketing.
How does she justify it?
The first thing we have to acknowledge is a blunt truth. All marketing, all sales, and frankly, most human communication is fundamentally about persuasion.
We are always trying to influence the behavior of others.
Exactly. Neuromarketing isn't introducing a new objective. It is simply providing infinitely better data on how to achieve it.
But isn't there a difference between writing a persuasive argument and chemically hacking the brain?
The critical distinction the book makes is about agency. You cannot use neuromarketing to force a human being to purchase a product or take an action they fundamentally at their core do not want to take.
So there's no mind control, Ray.
There is no biological buy button hidden in the amygdala that a marketer can just press against your will.
Okay, so if it's not mind control, what is the ethical framework for using these tools?
The ethical framework is about alignment and reducing friction.
Tell me more about that.
Neuromarketing should be about understanding how the human brain naturally wants to process information and then delivering your message in that exact preferred format.
Working with the brain, not against it.
It is the philosophy of doing things for the consumer rather than doing things to them.
That's a great distinction.
If we know biologically that a cluttered, confusing checkout process causes a cortisol spike and stresses the user out, then using neurological principles to design a clean, intuitive, relaxing interface isn't manipulation.
It's just providing a vastly superior human-centric experience.
You are actively supporting their biological decision-making process rather than forcing them to fight through an environment that is hostile to their nervous system.
That makes a lot of sense. Doing things for the consumer rather than to them. Okay, so we now understand the chemical hardware and the sheer volume of data flooding the system.
11 million bits.
Right. But that brings up a massive logistical problem.
Which is,
If the brain is being hammered with 11 million bits of data per second, how does anything get through?
the filter.
How does a billboard, an email subject line, or even a conversation physically make it past the noise and register in our conscious mind?
To understand that, we have to look at a very specific piece of neuroanatomy. We have to meet the bouncer standing at the door of the mind.
The bouncer. I love this.
It is a network of neurons located right at the top of the brainstem, and it is called the Reticular Activating System, or the RAS.
The bouncer at the door of the VIT club.
And the club is our conscious awareness.
And the bouncer is standing outside with a clipboard, looking at a chaotic, screaming crowd of 11 million sensory inputs trying to get in every single second.
And this bouncer is brutally, ruthlessly strict.
It has to be.
The RAS is the brain's ultimate filtering mechanism. It receives inputs from almost all of our sensory pathways, vision, hearing, touch, and it makes instantaneous split-second decisions about what is important enough to pass up to the neocortex for processing.
And what should be completely deleted.
If the RAS doesn't determine that a specific piece of information is relevant to your immediate survival or your deeply held goals, it simply drops it.
You never even consciously register that the information existed.
Exactly.
So as I'm walking down a city street, my eyes are physically seeing hundreds of advertisements on bus stops and taxis.
But your RAS is actively deleting them before your conscious mind can process them, saving you from cognitive overload.
It creates an illusion of reality based only on what it deems necessary.
Yeah.
So how do you get past the bouncer? If you are trying to communicate an important message, how do you get your data onto the VIP list?
You have to speak the language of the RAS. And the RAS fundamentally cares about three things: contrast, novelty, and intense personal relevance.
Contrast, novelty, personal relevance.
The RAS is essentially a pattern recognition machine. When things are predictable, it filters them out.
Because it's safe.
But when a pattern breaks, it flags it as a potential survival threat or opportunity. This is contrast and novelty.
Give me an example.
If you're sitting in a perfectly quiet room, your RAS is filtering out the ambient silence. But if a glass shatters, the sudden extreme contrast in acoustic energy breaks the pattern, and the RAS immediately alerts the conscious brain.
That makes sense. And what about personal relevance?
If you are at a loud, crowded party where dozens of people are talking simultaneously, your RAS filters all that noise into an unintelligible hum.
You can't understand a word.
But if someone 10 feet away says your specific first name, you will hear it instantly.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that happens all the time.
Your name is hard-coded into your RAS as highly relevant to your survival and social standing. It gets immediate VIP access.
So to apply this to business, if you're marketing your email or your presentation looks and sounds exactly like everything else in your industry, the bouncer will delete you.
You must provide a pattern interrupt.
You have to break the pattern.
Precisely. Now let's assume you managed to create enough novelty to bypass the RAS.
You made it into the conscious club.
The next challenge is making sure you actually get remembered. And Hart stresses that we fundamentally misunderstand how memory works.
We do.
We tend to think of memory as a digital video recorder, just saving files into a filing cabinet in the brain.
But it's actually a highly complex biological construction project.
Yes. Memory is a multi-stage physical process. It involves encoding the raw sensory data, physically storing it by strengthening the synaptic connections between neurons, often involving the hippocampus, and then eventually retrieving that pattern later.
And we have different types of memory, right?
We possess very different types of memory systems. We have explicit memory, which handles declarative facts we can consciously recall.
Like knowing that Paris is the capital of France.
Exactly. But we also have implicit memory, which handles subconscious patterns, emotional associations, and physical skills.
Like the precise balance required to ride a bicycle.
Right. And the bottleneck for all of this is short-term working memory, which the book reveals is shockingly small.
Incredibly small.
Decades of cognitive research, originating with George Miller's law, show that our active working memory can typically hold only about 4 to 7 distinct chunks of information at any given time.
4 to 7 chunks.
And without active rehearsal, it can only hold those chunks for less than a minute.
Think about the massive disconnect there. A company will bring a client into a pitch meeting and present a slide deck listing 15 different technical features of their software.
A terrible idea.
The presenter thinks they are building an overwhelming case of value. But biologically, the client's working memory hit capacity at item number 6.
By the time the presenter gets to feature 12, the client's brain is physically dropping the earlier information just to make room.
The information isn't being rejected, it's just overflowing the container.
Which brings us to one of the most powerful and actionable neurological insights in the entire book regarding memory encoding.
The primacy and recency effect.
Yes. This is about how the brain manages its limited energy during a continuous experience.
How does this U shape of attention actually work?
Well, because cognitive resources are so precious, the brain deploys extreme focused attention right at the start of any new experience.
Just figure out what's going on.
When a new video starts playing or a speaker steps up to a podium, the brain goes on high alert to assess the situation. It needs to determine, is this a threat? Is this relevant? Is this worth spending energy on?
So attention is super high.
Because of this massive spike in focused attention, information presented right at the beginning is highly likely to be encoded into long-term memory.
That is the primacy effect.
Right.
Okay, so the brain pays attention at the start. What happens next?
Once the brain decides that the situation is safe and somewhat predictable, it immediately seeks to conserve energy.
The battery saver turns on.
Its attention level plummets. It essentially puts the experience on autopilot and begins to coast.
Meaning?
This means that anything that happens in the middle of a video or the middle of the presentation is fighting an uphill battle against a brain that is actively trying not to pay attention.
But the attention comes back at the end. Why?
Because the brain is obsessed with closure and outcomes. When it senses that the experience is drawing to a close, the speaker says, "in conclusion," or the music swells the end of the film, the brain spikes its attention back up to maximum.
It wants to know how it ends.
It wants to capture the final resolution to understand the ultimate meaning of the event, so it knows how to categorize it for future survival.
And this final spike in memory encoding is the recency effect?
Exactly.
So if you were to graph human attention over time, it looks exactly like a giant U, sky high at the beginning, a massive prolonged dip in the middle, and sky high again right at the end.
And this biological reality should completely dictate how you structure any form of communication.
The absolute start and the absolute end are your most valuable real estate.
That is where memories are physically built. The middle is essentially a dead zone.
If you bury your most important call to action, your core pricing, or your biggest competitive differentiator 20 minutes into a 40-minute presentation, you are hiding your most critical data in the exact place where the brain is chemically designed to ignore it.
It's a huge waste of effort.
It's such a vital structural lesson. I actually played a little trick on our own listeners regarding memory earlier.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, think back to the beginning of this deep dive. I want you to try and recall the 10-item shopping list I mentioned when we were talking about the smartphone analogy. Take a second. Apple's bread. What else was on it? How many items can you name?
You never mentioned a shopping list.
Exactly. I never mentioned a shopping list at any point. But for a split second just now, your brain was scrambling, digging through its short-term memory banks, trying to retrieve a file that didn't exist.
A slightly manipulative trick, but it makes the point.
It highlights just how slippery and fragile our working memory really is. If you aren't anchoring your most critical information to the high attention peaks of the primacy and recency curves, you are relying on a system that is incredibly prone to failure.
Very true.
All right, so let's map our progress. We've used contrast and novelty to hack past the RAS bouncer. We've positioned our core message at the very beginning and the very end to guarantee it gets encoded into memory.
We're doing great.
But being noticed and being remembered isn't the finish line. The ultimate goal is to drive a decision.
Right.
We need the consumer's brain to choose us out of those 35,000 daily options. If the brain is so obsessed with conserving energy, how does it physically navigate that sheer volume of decision-making without completely burning out?
It manages the load by cheating.
Cheating.
Because running full logical computations in the neocortex is so metabolically expensive, the brain relies heavily on what psychologists call heuristics.
Heuristics.
Heuristics are essentially hardwired mental shortcuts. The brain simply does not have the battery power to search for the absolute mathematically perfect choice in every single daily scenario.
So it isn't looking for the best option, it's looking for the easiest option.
It relies on the good enough heuristic.
Good enough heuristic.
Precisely. To avoid the crushing weight of decision paralysis, the brain seeks the path of least cognitive resistance. It looks for a choice that feels safe, familiar, and just good enough to solve the immediate problem at hand.
Make it easy for me.
If you make your product or service seem highly complex, or if you force the consumer to do a lot of comparative math to figure out your value proposition, they won't do the math.
They'll just leave.
They will simply abandon the process and go with a competitor whose offering feels easier to understand, even if that competitor's product is technically inferior.
In the brain's brutal energy economy, ease is synonymous with survival.
Yeah.
So if we want to position ourselves as the easy, safe, good enough choice, we have to appeal to the underlying drivers that the reptilian brain is constantly scanning for.
The core fears.
Yes. The book breaks down how we must drill past surface-level logical wants and speak directly to the 3 core evolutionary fears. What are those 3 base fears?
Security, status, and strength. Everything we do, every choice we make at a subconscious biological level ultimately traces back to mitigating one of these three fears.
Let's break those down. What does the brain view as security?
Security is about the preservation of life. It's about physical safety, shelter predictability, and the avoidance of unknown risks.
So buying insurance?
When someone buys a highly comprehensive, overly complex insurance policy, their logical neocortex might say it's a sound financial investment. But their reptilian brain is just desperately trying to soothe the core fear of security by building a wall against unpredictable future threats.
And what about status?
Status is deeply tied to our evolutionary history as tribal creatures. For hundreds of thousands of years, being isolated or cast out of the tribe meant certain death by starvation or predation.
So we need the tribe.
Therefore, our brains are hardwired to be terrified of losing social standing. Status is about our place in the hierarchy. Are we respected? Are we desired? Do we belong?
How does that look in a modern purchase?
When someone purchases an incredibly expensive luxury sports car, they will consciously talk about the incredible German engineering and the horsepower.
Sure, they will.
But subconsciously, it is a massive play for status. They are purchasing a highly visible signal to broadcast their position in the hierarchy to the rest of the tribe.
Which leads strength.
Strength is about resource accumulation and empowerment. It's about having the tools, the time, and the physical or mental capacity to overcome obstacles.
So buying software or a new tool?
Buying a specialized piece of software that automates a tedious part of your job appeals to the feel of losing strength. It gives you back your time and makes you more capable.
If your marketing message doesn't quietly, subtly soothe at least one of these three deep-seated evolutionary fears, it will never resonate on a visceral level.
Never.
Okay, I have to bring up a massive objection here because I can hear corporate professionals listening to this and going,
This doesn't apply to me.
right, sure, maybe status and security apply when you're selling sports cars or life insurance to regular consumers, but I work in B2B. I sell business to business.
The B2B myth.
I am pitching million-dollar enterprise software systems to multinational corporations. These are procurement committees, they have spreadsheets, they have strict ROI requirements, they have board meetings.
They're purely rational.
They are entirely rational actors. They are not making million-dollar decisions based on raw emotion and base reptilian fears.
That is perhaps the most pervasive and damaging myth in the entire corporate world. And Katie Hart is wonderfully uncompromising in her dismantling of it.
She tears it down.
She strongly clarifies that B2B is an illusion. There is no such thing as a business making a decision.
Because businesses are just buildings and legal documents.
Exactly. Every single transaction is fundamentally human to human, H2H.
The human brain doesn't magically swap out its hardware just because you put on a tailored suit and sit in a glass conference room.
The procurement manager sitting across the table from you might have a highly complex Excel spreadsheet, but they are still operating with a reptilian brain that is secretly terrified of making a mistake.
Terrified.
In fact, if you look closely, what is the single biggest driver in corporate purchasing? It is almost always a combination of security and status.
Like the old saying, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM.
Precisely. That famous phrase is the ultimate expression of the security fear in a B2B context. The executive isn't choosing the most innovative solution. They are choosing the path of least resistance that protects their job, their reputation, and their status within the corporate tribe.
Because if they buy a risky startup software and it fails, they look bad.
They lose status.
Yeah.
B2B companies actually have exponentially more to gain from adopting neuromarketing precisely because so few of them use it.
That's a great point.
The entire industry is busy sending incredibly dry, boring feature lists to the neocortex, completely ignoring the stressed out, overwhelmed reptilian brain of the executive who actually has to sign the contract.
If you can make that executive feel biologically safe, you win the account.
That is a massive paradigm shift for anyone in corporate sales. Stop marketing to the spreadsheet and start marketing to the frightened human behind the desk.
And part of making that human feel safe is providing proof that they are making the right choice.
Yes, proof is essential.
The book outlines a specific hierarchy of proof that the brain scans for to justify decisions. What does that hierarchy look like?
Because the brain wants to conserve energy, it looks for external validation to prove that a choice is safe. It searches for proof in a descending order of impact.
What's at the top?
The most powerful is social proof the herd mentality. Seeing that hundreds of other people just like us are doing it signals to the reptilian brain that the action is safe. Following the herd historically kept us alive.
So that's the over 10,000 satisfied customers banner on a website.
Exactly. Next in the hierarchy is observational proof. This is seeing the product work with our own eyes, like a live demonstration or an unedited video showing the results. We trust our own visual processing deeply.
Seeing's believing.
Below that is analytical proof, the hard data. the statistics, the logical arguments.
Notice how far down the list logic actually sits.
Right. And finally, there is aspirational proof endorsements from high-status authorities or celebrities that our brain wants to emulate to raise our own tribal standing.
But there is a massive counterintuitive exception to this rule of social proof, and the herd mentality isn't there.
Yes, and it is a crucial caveat that marketers of high-end products frequently get wrong.
When does social proof fail?
Social proof works brilliantly for everyday accessible items. If I'm buying a new blender on Amazon, I want to see 40,000 five-star reviews. I want the safety of the herd.
Right.
But social proof completely backfires if you are selling exclusive premium or elitist products.
Because if I am spending $50,000 on a luxury mechanical watch, the absolute last thing I want to hear is, everyone is buying this.
Precisely. For premium buyers, the entire point of the purchase is status and exclusivity. They want to feel that they reside at the very top of the hierarchy, that they possess access to resources the general herd does not.
They want to be special.
If you tell an elite buyer that a luxury item is a bestseller, you instantly destroy the perceived exclusivity. You kill the status value, and you kill the sale.
You have to understand which fear you are actually addressing.
Exactly.
Okay, we have thoroughly mapped the psychological architecture. We understand the evolutionary fears, the energy-saving heuristics, and the chemical drivers.
We covered a lot of ground.
Now let's get deeply tactical. Let's look at the physical delivery systems we use to inject these messages into the brain, the human senses.
This is where it gets really fun.
How do we literally hack the senses, starting with the two that dominate our digital world, sight and sound?
Well, human beings are profoundly visually dominant creatures. A massive portion of our neocortex is devoted solely to processing visual data.
Which makes sense, we look at screens all day.
But as neuromarketing reveals, visual processing isn't just about making things aesthetically pleasing. It is about understanding the deeply subconscious physical cues hidden within the geometry of an image.
Let's revisit the hot coffee cup example I used in the introduction, because understanding the mechanism behind that changes how you look at every image.
It's a perfect example.
We established that seeing a left-handed coffee cup creates a micro-response of disgust in right-handed people. Why biologically does that happen?
It involves a fascinating neurological mechanism called mirror neurons.
Mirror neurons.
When we observe an action being performed, or even just see an object designed for action like a cup with a handle, our brain automatically subconsciously fires the exact same neural pathways that would be required for us to perform that action ourselves.
It runs a continuous, invisible physical simulation of the world around us.
Yes. So when a right-handed person sees a handle on the right side, their mirror neurons simulate reaching out. The simulation goes perfectly smoothly, and the brain registers a feeling of ease and approachability.
But when the handle is on the left, the brain's right-handed simulation fails.
It feels awkward, requiring the brain to imagine crossing their arm over their body or using their non-dominant hand.
This tiny simulated physical awkwardness violates the brain's desire for ease and energy conservation.
The reptilian brain flags it as wrong or difficult and triggers a microscopic stress response. The consumer just thinks, I don't know why, but I don't really like this ad.
They cannot articulate the handle orientation, but their biology has already made the judgment.
It makes you realize how many accidental, invisible mistakes we make every single day when designing websites, brochures, or taking product photos.
If you aren't thinking about the mirror neuron simulation, you are leaving engagement to chance. And speaking of visual processing, we have to address color psychology. I feel like this is an area absolutely riddled with internet myths, like yellow makes people hungry. But the book grounds color in actual physics and neuroscience.
It does. We have to remember that color isn't just a concept. It is literally electromagnetic radiation.
It's physical energy.
It is light traveling at specific wavelengths, entering the eye and hitting our retinas. And the physics of those wavelengths cause distinct physiological reactions in the human body.
How so? Let's take the color red.
Red light has a very long wavelength. When those long wavelengths enter the eye, they physically stimulate the nervous system.
What does that mean physically?
Exposure to bright reds has been clinically shown to subtly increase human heart rate, elevate blood pressure, and energize the body.
Wow.
Evolutionarily, red is the color of fire, of blood, and of ripe, calorie-dense fruit. It is a signal of high importance and urgency. It physically drives impulsive action.
Which explains exactly why no matter what store you walk into, every single clearance or sale tag is bright red.
They aren't just trying to catch you.
They are literally attempting to elevate your heart rate and scream at your reptilian brain that you need to act immediately before the resource is gone.
Exactly. It is applied biology.
And what about blue?
Conversely, let's look at short wavelengths of light, specifically blues. Short wavelengths have the exact opposite physiological effect. They act as a biological sedative.
They calm us down.
Exposure to blue light calms the central nervous system down. It lowers the heart rate, reduces blood pressure, and decreases rash, impulsive behaviors.
Evolutionarily blue signals the clear sky and calm water environments of profound safety and stability.
Which is why if you look at the logos of major banks, massive insurance conglomerates, or healthcare providers, almost all of them are draped in blue.
Because they deal with scary things.
They're dealing with things that naturally spike our cortisol, our life savings, our health unknown risks. By using short blue wavelengths, they are physically attempting to calm our stress hormones and signal safety.
It is not graphic design, it is chemical manipulation of the nervous system.
It truly is.
Okay, if we are hacking the visual cortex with images and colors, we are also feeding it written copy. The book highlights the sheer neurological power of specific words to completely bypass logical filters.
Words have immense power.
Two of the most potent being the words free and you. Let's start with free.
Free is arguably the single most powerful word a marketer can deploy because it doesn't just reduce the numerical cost of an item, it fundamentally alters the brain's internal risk assessment algorithms.
How does it do that?
Normally, every purchase requires the brain to calculate the risk of losing resources versus the reward of gaining the item. But the word free implies zero downside.
No risk at all.
It completely short-circuits the risk calculation, leading to wildly irrational behavior where people will wait in line for hours just to get a free item they don't even want.
And what about the word you?
You is the ultimate master key for the reticular activating system, that bouncer we discussed.
Getting past the velvet rope?
Human beings are fundamentally biologically egocentric. We have to be to survive. When a sentence begins with the word usual, the RAS instantly flags the incoming information as highly relevant to our personal survival or status.
It guarantees that the bouncer will let the message into the conscious club.
Yes.
And it's not just the specific words, but how they are strung together to evoke a physical response. The book mentions the legendary Marks and Spencer food ad campaigns in the UK.
Ah, yes, the famous, "This is not just food."
This is M&S food. That campaign completely changed the trajectory of their brand.
It was revolutionary at the time.
Before that, food advertising was mostly just showing a picture of the product and listing the price.
Yeah.
But M&S used incredibly dense, sensory-rich copywriting.
They didn't sell the ingredients.
The voiceover seductively described the chocolate pudding slowly melting. They used extreme slow-motion visuals. They talked about the rich, velvety texture. They sold the visceral, multisensory, biological experience of eating it.
And that matters neurologically.
By describing the texture and the melting, they were causing the viewer's brain to run a physical simulation of eating, literally causing people to salivate while watching television.
And that leads us perfectly into the next dominant sense, sound.
Sound.
We vastly underestimate the power of auditory input because we are so focused on screens. But as Hart points out, we are rarely, if ever, in an environment of true silence.
Even right now, as you listen to this, your brain is processing the ambient noise around you, the hum of the air conditioning, a distant siren, the rustle of your own clothes.
Sound is literally always on. You can close your eyes, but you cannot close your ears.
Exactly. And mechanistically, auditory information is processed incredibly fast by the brain.
Think about the neuroanatomy. Visual data has to enter, the eyes travel all the way along the optic nerves to the occipital lobe at the absolute back of the skull, be processed, and then routed to the emotional centers.
It's a long trip.
But your auditory cortex is located on the sides of your brain, directly behind your ears. It is a significantly shorter, faster middle pathway.
Meaning sound hits faster.
Sound can hit the amygdala and trigger a physical emotional response noticeably faster than visual data can.
Which is why the right minor chord in a movie score can make you feel a sense of impending dread before the killer ever appears on screen.
Or why specific sonic branding, like the intense bass-heavy ta-dum when you open Netflix, can instantly trigger an anticipatory dopamine release before the visual logo even fully resolves.
Sound is a fast track to emotion.
It is.
But visual and auditory inputs are just the tip of the iceberg. The book takes a fascinating and highly profitable turn when it explores what we might call the forgotten senses.
The ones we leave behind in the digital age.
Modern business obsesses over screens, meaning we design almost exclusively for sight and sound. But the human nervous system is constantly reading the environment through all five senses simultaneously.
If you are ignoring the other three, you are leaving an enormous amount of neurological influence completely unutilized.
Let's talk about touch or tactile marketing. Because in an increasingly digital remote work world, this feels like an entirely lost art.
It is a massive missed opportunity for physical differentiation.
So.
We process the physical world through an incredibly dense network of mechanoreceptors. These are specialized sensory neurons embedded all over our body, even wrapped around the base of our hair follicles. that are constantly seeding the brain data regarding texture, pressure, weight, and friction.
And thermoreceptors for temperature.
Yes. So when we move our entire customer relationship to a digital screen or an email, we are literally amputating an entire vital channel of data that the brain uses to judge reality.
We're making them numb, basically.
We are. The brain evolved to judge the value and permanence of an object by its physical characteristics.
Like holding a heavy brochure.
When you hand a client a physical object, say a business card or a brochure, printed on unusually heavy, deeply textured premium cardstock, as opposed to a flimsy, glossy piece of cheap paper, their mechanoreceptors send signals of weight and friction to the brain.
And the brain interprets that how?
The brain subconsciously equates that literal physical weight with the metaphorical weight, importance, and quality of your brand. Heavy physically translates to important. Textured translates to authentic and robust.
You simply cannot replicate that specific tactile confidence on the perfectly smooth glass screen of a smartphone.
That is profound. The physical weight of the paper changes the perceived truth of the words printed on it.
And then we move to the absolute fastest tracks to the emotional brain, smell and taste.
These two senses are biologically unique compared to all the others we've discussed.
Why are they unique?
Most sensory information, sight, sound, touch, has to go through a central relay station deep inside the brain called the thalamus. The thalamus acts like a switchboard operator, receiving the data and then routing it to the appropriate higher processing centers.
It's structured.
It's a structured, somewhat regulated process, but smell breaks all the routing rules.
How does smell bypass the switchboard?
The olfactory bulb, which processes smells, bypasses the thalamus entirely. It possesses a fast-track, direct neural connection straight into the limbic system, specifically directly into the amygdala, which processes emotion, and the hippocampus, which processes memory.
Straight to the emotion center.
Evolutionarily, this was a critical survival mechanism. Early humans needed to detect the scent of a hidden predator or the smell of rotting poisonous food and have an immediate, instantaneous emotional reaction of fear or disgust without waiting for secondary processing.
That perfectly explains the phenomenon where a highly specific smell, like the exact scent of a certain brand of sunscreen or the smell of fresh-cut grass or old books, can hit you, and you are literally instantly transported back to a childhood memory with overwhelming emotional clarity.
It's a direct, unmediated hack straight into the memory banks.
Exactly. It bypasses logic completely. And taste is intrinsically biologically linked to smell. We all intuitively know that food equals mood, but we rarely apply it strategically.
It changes the tone of a meeting.
The biological difference between offering a prospective client a bitter, highly caffeinated espresso versus a warm, gently sweet cup of chamomile tea will tangibly affect the neurological tone of your meeting.
One drink chemically drives urgency stimulation and potentially anxiety. The other chemically drives physical relaxation, safety, and compliance.
But the book takes this so much further than just serving the right snacks in a conference room. This was genuinely one of my favorite, most creative sections. Hart shares this brilliant concept for how completely non-food brands can utilize taste to build memory.
She proposes a hypothetical stationery company that manufactures envelopes with flavored adhesive seals.
It sounds whimsical at first, but from a neurological standpoint, it is a masterclass in multisensory integration.
Just think about the physical act. Normally, licking an envelope to seal a letter is a mildly unpleasant, purely functional experience. It tastes like bitter chemical glue.
Yeah.
But imagine you are sealing a festive Christmas card, and the moment you lick the adhesive, you get a burst of gingerbread or peppermint flavor. Or you are sending an invitation for a 30th birthday party, and the seal tastes like a subtle margarita.
By doing that, the brand takes a mundane, slightly negative tactile experience and transforms it into a sudden, surprising sensory delight.
The unexpected flavor provides a pattern interrupt, bypassing the RAS.
The novelty triggers a sudden release of dopamine.
And because taste is wired directly to the hippocampus, they are activating the deep memory pathways. That stationary brand becomes exponentially more memorable than their competitors because they triggered a holistic, multisensory physical response rather than just relying on a visual logo.
It just proves how much massive, unexploited white space there is for creativity when you finally understand the biological machinery.
There really is.
Okay, so at this point, the listener has a vast and powerful toolkit. They understand the 95% subconscious illusion. They know how to get past the RAS bouncer.
They understand how to soothe the core evolutionary fears of status and security.
They know about the mirror neurons simulating the coffee cup, the physics of color wavelengths, and the memory hacking power of a flavored envelope. The obvious question is, how do they actually deploy this tomorrow morning without causing total chaotic disruption in their business?
That is the crucial final step of the methodology. The greatest danger when people discover neuromarketing is the temptation to change absolutely everything at once.
They want to completely overhaul their website, their pitch deck, and their advertising overnight based on these principles.
But Hart explicitly warns against this detailing. The most common catastrophic trap businesses fall into the fundamentally flawed A/B test.
Let's walk through the exact scenario from the book to illustrate why this is so dangerous. Let's say you have an existing digital ad and it's performing okay, but you decide you want to neuromarket it.
You decide to use all your new tricks.
You change the main image to something highly emotional to trigger mirror neurons. You rewrite the headline to specifically target the reptilian fear of losing security. You change the Buy Now button to a bright, long wavelength red to drive impulsive action. And you change the copy to prominently feature the word free.
Sounds like a super ad.
You launch this new, highly optimized ad, and conversions immediately shoot up by 30%. You celebrate right. That is a massive win.
Well, you might celebrate the influx of revenue, but scientifically and strategically, you have learned absolutely nothing about your specific audience.
Wait, why not? The numbers went up.
Because if you change more than one variable at a time, you have destroyed your ability to identify causality. You have no idea which specific change actually caused the increase in conversion.
Oh, I see.
Was it the emotional image? Was it the red button? Was it the word free? Or in a nightmare scenario, what if the new emotional image actually performed significantly worse than the old one? But the word free was so incredibly powerful that it carried the entire ad and still resulted in a net positive.
You simply do not know.
And because you don't know the cause, you cannot reliably replicate the success in your next campaign. You are still essentially guessing.
Exactly. The golden unbreakable rule of testing is that you must isolate variables.
If you want to know how your audience responds to color psychology, you test the original ad against the exact same ad with only the button color changed. Literally nothing else.
You measure the result.
Then you test the exact same ad with only the headline changed. It is a painfully slow process. It requires immense operational discipline. But it is the only scientific way to build real, reliable biological data about what actually drives your specific market.
It is the stark difference between getting lucky and building a repeatable system.
And to help facilitate this, the book strongly encourages every listener to begin building what they call a swipe file or an observation library.
Yes, the goal is to start moving through your daily life, observing the world through this newly acquired neuromarketing lens.
When you are scrolling online and an advertisement actually makes you stop and look, don't just consume the content, analyze your own biology.
Why did your RAS let it through?
Did it use a short wavelength blue to suddenly calm you down amidst chaotic news? Did the copywriting poke at your deep-seated fear of losing status?
Did they place their best argument at the very beginning to hack the primacy effect?
Deconstruct the mechanics, catalog these observations, and build your own personal library of effective biological triggers.
I love that concept. It transforms the entire world, every store you walk into and every website you visit, into a live psychological laboratory.
It really does.
Okay, let's bring this massive journey home. We have covered an incredible amount of ground today. We started by shattering the illusion of rational choice, revealing that our conscious mind is largely just a PR firm justifying the 95% of decisions already made by the fast, energy-saving reptilian brain.
We met the ruthless RAS bouncer blocking 11 million bits of data per second and learned how to sneak past using the contrast of a shattered glass or the sound of our own name.
We mapped the U-shape of human attention, realizing we must encode our most vital information at the extreme primacy and recency peaks.
We explored how to soothe the ancient evolutionary fears of security status and strength, even when selling to a corporate procurement manager.
And we deeply examined how microscopic sensory details the physical orientation of a coffee cup, handle the exact wavelength of a color, or the unexpected taste of an envelope seal, can create massive involuntary physiological shifts in desire, trust, and memory.
It provides an incredibly powerful, totally new lens through which to view human behavior and communication.
But before we wrap up, I want to pivot the entire conversation. We have spent this entire deep dive talking about using these tools to communicate with other people, selling to customers, persuading clients, engaging an audience. But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over when this deep dive ends.
If the biological hardware of the human brain operates exactly as we've described for the last hour, what happens when you turn this incredibly powerful lens inward onto yourself?
Exactly. Think about the profound implications for your own life. If your own brain runs 95% on subconscious autopilot, if you constantly rely on the lazy good enough heuristic just to save metabolic energy,
if you are chemically wired to crave the dopamine from the anticipation of a reward rather than the reward itself, How could you use neuromarketing to actually sell yourself on your own personal goals?
It is arguably the most fascinating application of all this data. How do you market your own daily habits, your fitness goals, your professional productivity to your own stubborn biology?
Are you constantly trying to force your slow, easily exhausted neocortex to rely on sheer willpower to go to the gym at 5 a.m. or finish a difficult project?
When you really need to be figuring out how to bribe your own reptilian brain, how can you make the good habit visually frictionless, like ensuring the metaphorical handle is on the correct side?
How can you artificially engineer an anticipation spike for your own long-term goals to keep your dopamine high?
How can you systematically soothe your own core fears of status and security so your cortisol drops, your neocortex comes back online, and you can actually focus deeply?
Because once you truly understand how the biological machine works, you don't just become a highly effective marketer, you gain the ability to become the conscious, deliberate architect of your own behavior.
That is where the ultimate power of neuroscience lies. It is not just the key to understanding the market, it is the key to understanding the mind.
What an incredibly empowering place to leave it.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep analyzing the hidden biology behind those everyday interactions, and start viewing the world, and most importantly yourself, through this newly unlocked lens. We will catch you next time.